We're starting a new series called On Brand, and I just want you to think about for a minute, what does it mean to be on brand? I'm going to give you a definition provided by AI. On brand means that something is in line with the brand's identity, values, and public image. For instance, let's say an eco-friendly brand would say they use recyclable products, and their colors would always be brown and green, right? That's exactly what you would see. Or just put it more simply, a Coke consistently tastes like a Coke and not like a Pepsi. That's why when New Coke came out, people quit drinking New Coke because it didn't taste like Coke, right? To be on brand is so important. And it's really important for companies, right? It helps build trust with the audience. They know what they're supposed to expect. It differentiates that company from another company. Like, an Apple product is not a Microsoft product, right? One, it works. But, an Apple product is different because it's on brand with being Apple. Microsoft is on brand with crashing, But it also... when a company is on brand, it presents the image that it wants others to see. But all of this idea about being on brand has me wondering, what does that mean for us who are followers of Jesus to be on brand? Like, to use this definition, what sort of identity and values and public image do we want to show? What do we want to be known for? Because the truth is, when you look over the past few centuries, or really the past 2 millennia, followers of Jesus have been known for a lot of things. And some of those things have been good. And some of those things, well, I'm not sure they were on brand with what Jesus had in mind. So what we're going to do for the next 2 weeks is we're going to look at 2 passages out of John chapter 13 where Jesus clarifies for us what it means to be on brand as a follower of Jesus. And we're going to do something a little bit weird. I'm actually going to start at the end of the chapter this week, and then we're going to go back to the beginning of the chapter next week. But really, both of these passages clarify what it means for us to be on brand as followers of Jesus. And I think this is a great follow-up from what we just talked about with the Spirit of Our Politics series. And it's a great setup as we all move into the holiday season, which hasn't started yet because it's not Thanksgiving week. So if you guys already have up your Christmas decorations, God forgive you. God forgive you. Somebody in my neighborhood put up Christmas lights, but they ain't turning them on yet. I just thought it was funny. They're on their house, they're just not turning them on. That's nothing to do with what we're talking about. So, like I said, we're going to be in John chapter 13. Let me kind of give you some context as you're pulling up that passage. Like I said, it's at the end of the chapter. This story takes place during the Last Supper, which takes place on the night before Jesus was executed. And Judas has just left the room. Jesus told him, go do what you're supposed to do. Judas leaves the room. Only Jesus knew what Judas was up to. The other disciples, well, they had no clue what was going to happen. So Jesus tries to warn them. And I'm going to start reading in verse 33. It says this, my children. Now, I just find it fascinating right here. This is the only time in the Gospels that we know that Jesus calls his disciples my children. A better translation of this is actually dear children. Like there is this immense love coming from Jesus at this moment. My children, I will be with you only a little longer. You will look for me, and just as I told the Jews, so I tell you now, where I am going, you cannot come. To which the disciples were thinking to themselves, whoa, what is going on here? What do you mean you're leaving? I mean, we've been with you for 3 years. Where are you going? I mean, what is going on? This just disturbed them, probably freaked them out a ton, because actually they keep coming back to this fact that Jesus was leaving multiple times over the next few chapters. But Jesus, as Jesus does, wants to leverage these last few hours that he has with his disciples. And so he just changes the topic altogether. Basically, he drops a bomb and says, I'm leaving, and then changes topics. He goes on and says this in verse 34, a new command I give you. A new command I give you. To which the disciples are thinking to themselves, a new command? We don't need a new command. We already have plenty of commands. Like there are 613 commands that we are struggling to keep. In fact, Jesus, didn't you already kind of narrow those down to 2 commands? Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. Love your neighbor as yourself, right? Why in the world would Jesus add a new one? But as we're about to see, Jesus wasn't just adding a new command to an existing list of commands. As Andy Stanley says, he was doing something far more radical. He was reframing all of his commands. He goes on, a new command I give you, love one another. To which the disciples, I'm pretty sure, wanted to raise their hand and go, this isn't new, Jesus. You've talked about this before, right? You said that the greatest commandment was to love God and love other people. This isn't new. You've already told us, Jesus, to love God with all of our heart, soul, mind, and strength. You've told us to love our neighbor as ourselves. So this command is not a new command, but what Jesus is about to say is new. And what Jesus is about to say was so powerful that this is what allowed Christianity to expand from a handful of followers right after Jesus died to 1/3 of the Roman Empire's population 300 years later. That is how powerful this command is that Jesus is about to say. It is a command that not only changed the world then, but I believe could change our world now. This is what Jesus would say is our on brand. He goes on and says, a new command I give you, love one another. As I have loved you, so you must love one another. See, the command to love one another wasn't new, but the command to love one another as Jesus had loved them, that was brand new. Jesus took the golden rule. You know the golden rule, right? Do for others as you would have them do for you. And he takes it one step further. He says, do for others as I have done for you. Love others as he has loved you. I know that for many of us, when we think of loving others as Jesus has loved us, we immediately think of the cross, right? Which is true. We should think of the cross. It's good and right for us to think of the cross. But for these disciples who were sitting at the table with Jesus during this Last Supper, when Jesus said as I have loved you, so you must love one another, they weren't thinking of the cross because the cross hadn't happened yet. You know what they were thinking? They were thinking of all of those personal examples of how Jesus had loved them over the past 3.5 years. I imagine Jesus looking at Matthew and saying, hey, Matthew, do you remember that when I called you to be my follower, what you were doing? Like I invited you into my group when everybody who was in my group wanted you to die a slow and excruciating death because you were a tax collector, you were a traitor, everybody hated you, but I invited you to follow me. Love others like that. I imagine him looking at Peter and saying, Peter, do you remember all those times when you put your foot in your mouth? Which you're about to do in a few minutes again, but do you remember all those times when you said stuff that you shouldn't have said? And remember how I loved you by being patient with you? Go and love others like that. I imagine him looking at James and John and saying, do you guys remember when you wanted to call down fire from heaven and wipe out all those people who had just rejected me? And how instead of me rebuking you, I invited you to join me on the Mount of Transfiguration and you got to see me in all of my glory. Love others like that. I imagine him looking at Nathaniel and saying, hey, Nathaniel, remember when we first met? And really, basically, you were a racist, man, because you heard I was from Nazareth and you just thought I was a backwoods hick who didn't know anything and was ignorant and was uneducated because you said there was nothing good that could ever come out of Nazareth. But I didn't let what you thought of me change how I thought about you. Love others like that. I imagine him looking at Simon and saying, Simon, remember when I invited you to follow me? The hatred and the anger and the malice that was in your heart, you wanted to violently murder every Roman you came into contact with, but still I invited you with all of your hatred and anger and malice to come and follow me. Do the same thing for others. Love others the same way. I even imagine Jesus thinking of Judas and saying, guys, you don't know what's about to happen, but one of us is about to betray me, and I've known about it for a really long time, and I didn't kick him out of the tribe. I want you to love others the same way. See, Jesus loved these men in specific and practical ways. And here with this new command that he has given them, he invites them to love one another in the same specific and practical ways that he had loved them. Which leads me to ask, how has Jesus loved you? Love others the same way. We'll come back to that, but Jesus is not done, because next he tells us that this kind of love, loving others the same way that he has loved us, should be the identifying characteristic of those of us who are his followers. Look at what he says in verse 35. By this, loving others the same way that I've loved you, everyone will know that you are my disciples if you love one another. Like this new command to love one another the same way Jesus has loved us should be the identifying mark for us as the church. It should be our on brand. It should be what we are known for. It should be our governing ethic. It should be the standard by which all of our behavior is measured. I found this fascinating. The early church father, Tertullian, which is a fantastic name, he reported that there were some pagans in his city. He lived about a century after the gospel's written. But he reported that the pagans that were in his city said this about the Christians in their city. See how they love one another? Like that's how they were described. I hope that becomes true about us once again, right? And what I find fascinating about what Jesus says here is he said, it is not what we believe that we will be known as his disciples for. Or it's not what we say we believe or how much knowledge we have or how much Bible that we know that lets the world know that we are his disciples. It's specifically how we treat one another. One another being the people who are also followers of Jesus, the people who are sitting next to you, the people who say they are Christians, how we treat them and talk about them and respond to them and react towards them and care for them. That is what identifies us as being genuine followers of Jesus. It should be on brand that people who are outside the faith look at those of us who are inside the faith and say, see how much they love one another? They don't even vote the same way, and they love each other. They don't even like the same football teams, and they love each other sometimes. We'll see what happens in 2 weeks. But yeah, whatever. I don't want to hear that talk. Be quiet, people. I shouldn't have said that. That wasn't in the notes. But those who are on the outside should look at those of us on the inside and say the thing that sets them apart is they have such an immense love for each other that, man, I want some of that. That is exactly what caused the early church to grow from a handful of followers to over 30 million people, 1/3 of the Roman Empire in 300 years. Wouldn't it be great if that were to happen again today? Wouldn't it be great if when people thought of us, and if they were cornered and say, you got to tell us what Christians are known for, they'd be like, I have no idea what those people believe, but man, they love each other. Wouldn't that be amazing? Now, if we're honest, this is really easy to talk about, but it's a lot more difficult to do. I love this quote from theologian Don Carson. He says this, I suspect that one of the reasons why there are so many exhortations in the New Testament for Christians to love other Christians is because what? It is not an easy thing to do. Like over and over again in the New Testament, we're told to love one another. Paul says it in almost every single one of his letters, to love others as Christ has loved us. And then he fleshes it out in some different ways, right? It is the reason it's repeated over and over again is because this isn't like something that we can just do a quick fix and it's good. This is something that's hard. He goes on and says this. Ideally, however, and I love this, the church itself is not made up of natural friends. It is made up of natural enemies. Like, we shouldn't get along. There should be something about us that we just push back against one another. But he goes on and says this, what binds us together is not common education, common race, common income levels, common politics, common nationality, common accents, common jobs, or anything else of that sort. He says, Christians come together not because they form a natural co-location, but because they have all been saved by Jesus Christ and owe him common allegiance. It's our King that we join together around. We have a common allegiance to a common King. And as subjects of that King, we should be known by our love for one another. I think this is so good, his quote here. But here's what I know you're thinking. All of you know this, right? Especially if you've been to Hub City before. We've talked about this. We all know this. But this is one of those things that we have to keep coming back to over and over again because it's that important. And because we are likely, in the culture that we live in, we're going to, if we're not careful, if we don't come back to this over and over again, we're going to get swept away in that river of kind of us versus them and divisiveness and just getting on each other's nerves and being unforgiving and allowing bitterness to take a root in our heart. If we don't keep coming back to this command over and over again, we'll forget it. Or we'll say it's not that important. But according to Jesus, it is of utmost importance. That's why he gave this new command, to love one another as he has loved us. And this command should govern our behavior and our responses and our language and our online life and our tone towards one another. And I think that our obedience to this new command should be what people say about us when they say that we are on brand. Man, those people from Hub City, they sure do love one another. So let me ask you, how has Jesus loved you? How has Jesus loved you? He would say, love each other the same way. Like, has he shown you love through forgiveness? Love others by forgiving them. Has he shown you love by being compassionate towards you? Show love to others by being compassionate towards them. Has he shown you love by being patient with you? Show love to others by being patient with them. Has he shown his love to you by being gracious to you? Show love to others by being gracious to them. In fact, I came up with something, kind of a fill in the blank, that I think could help us all out. It says this. Oops, I didn't finish the quote, so it's on the notes. But here's the fill in the blank. Hey, this is where you insert your name here. Hey, Jonathan. Remember when, and then insert a time when you screwed up or needed help. For some of you, that's a long list, right? Insert a time when you screwed up or needed help. And how I showed you my love by, insert how Jesus showed his love to you. Love others like that. In fact, I want you to pause right now and just to look at this. And you fill in the blanks with your story. You fill in the blanks with your name. And remember a time when you screwed up or needed help. Fill in the blank. And then remember how Jesus showed his love to you. Specifically, how did Jesus show his love to you? And then imagine him looking at you in the eye, as I imagine him looking these disciples in the eye as he's sitting around the table at the Last Supper. And imagine him saying, love others like that. The same way he has loved us. See, what I love about Jesus' command here is it's not some ambiguous command that we just got to figure out how to do. No, Jesus, he tethers this command to himself. That we as his followers, if we're going to be on brand as his followers, need to love others the same way he has loved us. And I think that all of us in the room who are followers of Jesus have experienced Jesus' love in one way or another. And he says to us, love others like that. And you know what's so amazing about this? The goal of being a disciple is to be with Jesus so you can become like Jesus, so you can do what Jesus would do if he were you. Jesus is just inviting us to be like him. That we would do what he has already done to us. This is how we live the life that he would live if he were living our life. We would love as he has loved us. I love this quote from Andy Stanley. He says, the litmus test for being a card-carrying Jesus follower involved nothing even remotely religious. It was relational. It had nothing to do with how one treated God. It had everything to do with how one treated others. Think about Jesus for a minute. He was masterful at loving the unlovable. That's why tax collectors and sinners love to hang out with Jesus. That's even why the religious leaders were offended by Jesus, because he loved people you weren't supposed to love. And he has loved us. And so he says, once again, a new command I give you, love one another. As I have loved you, so you must love one another. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples if you love one another. This is what it looks like to be on brand as a follower of Jesus. And I think this is how we move forward from the crazy election season and move into the holiday season with all of the crazy Uncle Eddies that are going to, Cousin Eddies that are going to show up at our house over the next few weeks. This is also how we move forward as a church. That we would love others as we have been loved by Jesus. So here's what I want. Can you put that fill in the blank back up there again for me? I want to just give you a minute, just you and God, to think through how God has loved you. How has Jesus loved you? And then to take, if you're courageous enough, some time to say, Jesus, help me to love others like that. So why don't you just close your eyes, unless you need to look at the screen to kind of fill in the blank. And just think about how Jesus has loved you. How has Jesus shown his love to you? Why don't you ask him to give you the courage to love others in the same way? Lord Jesus, first off, I just want to thank you for loving us. And yes, you showed your love for us by dying for us even when we were sinners, and we are so grateful for that. That is the ultimate expression of love. But you've also shown your love to us in so many other ways. You are patient with us. You meet with us when we show up to meet with you. You forgive us even when we sin deliberately. You speak to us. You acknowledge us. You see us. You show your love to us by giving us your word that tells us about yourself. You show your love to us by giving us one another. You've shown your love to us in so many ways, and we just want to acknowledge that and say thank you for that and really praise you for how you have loved us. My prayer for us, especially those of us who are followers of Jesus, is that you would help us to love others like that. Help us to love one another, the people who are a part of our church family, as well as those who are followers of Jesus who aren't a part of our church family. Help us to love them well as you have loved us well. We want to be on brand as your followers. We want to be accused of the same thing that those first century followers of Jesus in Tertullian's day were accused of. Oh, look at how they love one another. Man, if that could be said of us again, that would just be incredible. I ask for that, Jesus. In fact, as we go and eat together right now, help us to love one another as you have loved us. Thanks for this new command. I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.